Other than the question, this is all about your own beliefs. This is not what do I need to say to somebody so that they will say yes. This is why do you believe that this element of your strategy must be part of this answer?
Hello, and welcome to the Move the Chains podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Munsey. As an entrepreneur, best-selling author, performance coach, and keynote speaker, I help athletes, executives, and leaders around the world win the mental game in order to take the next steps towards success. This Move the Chains philosophy is designed to help you build consistency by attacking your big goals one step at a time every single day so that you can achieve your big dreams. And here on the show, we're going to interview some of the world's most successful people to learn how they have similar systems to help them create success. So look, if you're somebody who struggles with sharing your vision, your ideas, maybe getting your point across or connecting with others the way you want, you're going to love today's episode. We're joined by Tamsen Webster, part keynote speaker, part message strategist. When I see that, my brain wants to say massage therapist.
I know, yeah, right?
You're not a massage
sadly, no. Sadly, no. That's not where my skills lie.
Tamsen has 20 years of experience in the marketing world, 13 years as a Weight Watchers leader, 4 years as a TEDx executive producer. She's also the author of the book, The Red Thread, a framework to help you make your ideas bigger than you think. Tamsen, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Ryan. It's delightful to be here.
So how does one become a message strategist?
Perseverance and kind of inexhaustible desire to figure out why messages don't work. I've always been really, really interested in how transformational change happens. That's why I love the topic of this podcast. I started my career in marketing and I just kind of kept finding that there were reasons and things that made messages and marketing and conversations even just not work to do that. And so I just over time collected all those lessons and eventually started to help other people apply the lessons I'd learned.
I love that. And I think this is such a fascinating world to study and dive into. I find that my work is basically two sides of the same coin. One is in helping individuals achieve their goals, and the other is in the marketing world. And both of them revolve around the same thing. I think you can relate to this where
absolutely, as
an individual, you have to sort of ignore the marketing and all the stuff that is kind of pulling you off track. And then as a marketer, it's how do you get someone to take the action that you want them to take? So it's fascinating to me. I'm curious with your experience at Weight Watchers, you definitely had to help people make behavior change. So I'm curious, what did you learn during that experience that you have folded into your overall recipe now?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is that nothing will work at the market level that doesn't work at the individual level first. So, when I was at Weight Watchers, I was moonlighting with full knowledge of my day jobs. But so what was interesting was, the whole time I was a Weight Watchers leader, I was also working I was a head of marketing. I was in charge of fundraising, communication strategies, all sorts of, branding and all those kinds of things. And what I realized, having gone to school for marketing, was that, when I was in the meeting room, the things that actually helped people see things in a way that allowed it to make sense for them to be able to kind of follow that new way of thinking into a new way of behavior were not only sometimes 180 degrees opposite of what you were supposed to do from a marketing standpoint, but also that those supposed to do things from a marketing, persuasion, influence standpoint actually oftentimes ensured that long-term transformational change would never happen. And so what I really started to do was to take those lessons I learned from what needs to happen inside someone's individual head, and then started to map those to things that I could do in those kind of more broadcast type messages that were involved in marketing.
Can you share some specific examples of maybe what really helped things click, not just for individuals, but then for the program itself? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways that I frame it is understanding that you can't want something more than they do. Meaning, there is no such thing as getting someone to do the thing that you want them to do, at least not long term. And so for instance, one of the biggest things that I found was instead of trying to convince someone that you can do it or convince someone that this is worth it, or to convince a market to want something that they don't yet want, it became, what I found just over and over again was a lot easier whether it was in an individual conversation or at a market level message, to anchor that message in something that person actively and knowingly already wanted. Mm-hmm. So for instance, unless a company is actively looking for a new data software platform, you're probably not going to get them to suddenly say, oh, you know what? We need a new data software platform. So it really is about saying and flipping from, let me help you discover the real problem that you don't know you have and based all that marketing on it, which my opinion ends up being pretty condescending to the people that you're talking to. And instead say, what's important to you? What do you feel like you're good at? How can we do this? Or if it's a market level, what are you as a company or as an individual already trying to do? And then the real work for messaging is not in trying to get them to kind of go someplace new, but rather in drawing a clearer map from where they currently are to what your solution might be.
Yeah, I love that approach. I guess let's jump into your book, The Red Thread. And
sure.
I'd love to have you explain that to folks and maybe outline the 5 steps and we can go from there.
Absolutely. So the Red Thread grew out of my desire to figure out how to take what I had learned in the meeting room and as a TEDx executive producer and idea strategist to help other people do it too. Because once I figured out, hey, these concepts are important, they're effective, I didn't feel right to keep them for me. So what I was trying to do was figure out, how do I create almost like a universal decoder ring for taking an idea out of one person's head and presenting it in such a way that it would be more likely to kind of upload into somebody else's head with as little loss and as little friction as possible. So the Red Thread started kind of with that question in my mind. And it wasn't long before I found that there's a really good case for stories and story structure to be that kind of universal decoder ring. We really are, as Lisa Crone says, wired for story. It's how we make sense of information. But it isn't just like once upon a time stories like Disney movies or whatever. Really what is happening in our heads pre-consciously without us even realizing it is that we're creating this kind of cause and effect, stimulus response, if then story. If I do this, then that will happen because. So the Red Thread started as figuring out how could I make a universal kind of Mad Lib, if you remember that game from being a kid, for this universal way of understanding things. And so that's what the Red Thread is. It's this kind of a go-to universal story structure that you can use to kind of download your idea into that structure so that once it's in it, it's much more likely to be understandable to somebody else. So that's kind of the background on it. But the 5 steps, as you say, are based on the 5 kind of big moments in any story. The first one is where the action of a story starts. And that's with what I call the goal. But that's, the thing to think about that is that's what we were talking about before. That's something that somebody actively and knowingly wants right now. I like to use the example of Disney movies. There's almost always what's known as an I want song. I grew up with like Little Mermaid. She says like she wants to be where the people are, right? So that's really when the action of a story starts. Then the next major point in a story where the story continues to develop, This is where that real problem then comes in, because there's something that gets in the way of that thing that somebody wants, which, by the way, the fact they don't have it is a problem. But there's another problem that they don't know about, right? That shows up, that helps explain why whatever they're trying to do now to get that thing isn't working. So I call that the problem. So we have a goal, we have a problem. Then the next major point is that in order for someone to say, okay, not only do I have a problem, but here's what I need to do to solve it. There's one more point before that real kind of realization that is often called a moment of truth. Probably one of the most famous ones is actually at the end of Empire Strikes Back. You don't have to have seen it because you probably already know it. It's where Darth Vader says to Luke, "Luke, I am your father." Sorry if that's a spoiler. If it is, not sorry. Okay. But that's where all of a sudden there's this, oh my gosh, this is the true nature of my circumstances. And now that I know that's true, the options available to me are by definition different if I choose to take that into account. So goal, problem, truth. And then that truth really forces that choice. What am I going to do with this new piece of information? Now that I understand what the real problem is and what I have to solve first, and I have a different understanding of like the nature of reality. Now, what am I going to do with it? And that's where the change comes in. And the change, by the way, is where your approach, strategy, product offering, that's what that is. You're basically saying, hey, if you want this thing that you want at the beginning, then you need this to make this change. And then the actions are simply how do you put that into practice? Even though we think of it linearly, it really is a loop. Our brains know a story is over when we can answer the question about whether or not that person got what they wanted. So it really kind of circles back all the way to that initial goal and says, particularly business messaging, hey, not only did you get what you wanted, you also got a whole lot more. So that's really the kind of quick-ish overview of the process.
Yeah. So when you talk about the problem, and I guess to clarify for ease of conversation, let's call it the hidden problem, the problem that they didn't know about. How does identifying that make communication more persuasive outside of, say, like a keynote presentation?
Yeah. Well, so the identification of that means a couple different things. One is it allows you to be much more clear on not only what it is that you are asking people to do, right? So let's say, I don't know, give me an example. Like, what's a question that you are often working with your clients on, like just in a conversation?
My degree is in nutrition. Let's keep it in weight loss since you've got a lot of experience there too.
Yeah. Oh, great. I have a perfect example. Okay. You've probably experienced then a number of people who want to lose weight, right? Like they know that. And they also feel, so the other known problem for them, not hidden, is that they consider themselves to be night eaters. Right? Right? You've got people who are like, I'm fine all day. And then at night, the wheels come off. Now at Weight Watchers, the way that Weight Watchers works, and worked then, at least, I'm not still part of it, was that basically all food was assigned a point value. You had a point value. It was like a budgeting, basically. You just keep your points that you eat and drink in that rate. And then by and large, with some adjustments that would generally lead to achieving whatever your weight goals were. Okay. So what the hidden problem was the kind of the interpretation of a day. Right. And so what was interesting was that, there's nowhere in the Weight Watchers literature, for instance, that said that the points had to start in the morning. It was just basically that it was a whole day, right? It was just 24 hours. And so by understanding that actually it was when the points were available was the hidden problem, right? It was this mismatch of not the number of points. It was the number of points when they needed the most points. That was the hidden problem. That allowed me to be much clearer about what could I do to solve that. And I was like, hey, start the points at night, right? Like start the points at like when you get home from work, so that you have the most points when there. And when they were like, well, can I do that? It also made it very clear to me on how I could justify that shift for them in a way that didn't need any additional convincing. I'm like, A, there's nothing in the literature that says it has to start in the morning. And B, wouldn't you agree that a day is simply 24 hours? So if we just move that, right, then I don't have to challenge that they think they're a night eater. Like you and I both know there's no technical clinical diagnosis of night eating, right? Like it's not an actual thing largely, but it is the perception of something and therefore it is real.
Right.
So I didn't have to challenge that for them. I could just find a way to adjust reality for them to make it work differently. And so to me, that's what identifying the hidden problem allows you to do, is it allows you to maintain, and it allows you to change someone's behavior potentially without having them have to change who they see themselves to be. And that to me is the key when we're talking about long-term change, is that it's not like, is that changing behavior without changing identity is oftentimes the first step. Sometimes eventually it'll lead to change of identity, but we kind of have to oftentimes start with the behavior first.
Yeah, that's a really powerful differentiation, and that concept for an individual, that's huge. So again, like I know that this really stemmed from keynote speaking and TEDx, and there are some people listening that are speakers, but I love the transfer of this into maybe more universal applications.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And that's really the nature of my work. I mean, I think a lot of people know me from keynotes and speaking, but I've always considered myself like a change communicator. Like that's what I'm interested in, no matter what the application is. Yeah.
Yeah. So on that, like, I'd love to maybe walk through a couple more examples of, like maybe one as in facilitating better meetings. I know most people have jobs and they hate meetings, or another one would be specific, since you have such a marketing background. Like, I'd love to talk about how we'd use this to build a marketing campaign that is customer centric, that resonates, and maybe we'll start with that one since we're on it. But you said it's a little more cyclical than linear. So, is it possible to get all of those elements in one touch point, or do you have to do that throughout the maybe we'll say different ads throughout a campaign?
Yeah. So I would say that, yes, depending. I know that wasn't a yes or no question. All right. So in any like short-term way, right, it's very difficult to get all of those points out there explicitly. I'm going to come back to an example where if you understand how all of this really works, you can activate a lot of them all at once, but I'll come back to that. Just remind me. I'm like, just say to me iPod if I seem to go off track.
Okay.
But to the second point, so ads, or particular touch points are oftentimes taking a piece or a part, right? They're introducing or getting attention with some aspect or some combination of these things. And then if we're talking about something like a website, like there's, you can in a paragraph of text kind of hit all of those points at a high level. But I would also say over the course of, let's say, a campaign, it's almost like paint by numbers. Again, totally dating myself here. Let's see, what would be a more up-to-date example of this? It's almost like, it's kind of like building in, let me go to Minecraft. Like my kids were playing Minecraft for a long time. So it's about kind of within a set number of tools available over time, you start to build a picture of what it is that you're trying to say. But in order to do that, you kind of have to know what that core story and what that core message really is. So back to the iPod example. I remembered. Okay. So what I think the thing that's really interesting to understand, and it's actually what led to my second book, is that sitting underneath a story is an argument. And it goes back to that if then because thing I was mentioning before. And really any story is an argument in disguise, right? It's basically like, if you think about, for instance, like, the fables that we grew up with, like the tortoise and the hare, right? That's a story. And it's an argument for, in this case, it's really explicit, that slow and steady wins the race. So, but that relationship is always true, whether or not that argument is explicit or not. So I say that because every action that any of us takes ends an internal argument about why that action makes sense. So for instance, like anytime that somebody is doing something, even let's say go back to food and weight goals, it may not be a productive behavior, but if somebody comes home and then just like the wheels come off, it's because at some level they are trying to do something for themselves, right? They're trying to exert control. They're trying to de-stress, right? Again, the actual behavior is not productive, but it does make sense in the context of some other kind of deeper conversation that's happening. So if we can understand that structure of the argument's always there, then really effective campaigns, ad campaigns, can activate it. And my favorite example, because most people are familiar with it, and if they're not, it's easy to explain, is the ad campaign that launched the iPod like 24 years ago, right? You remember the tagline for it?
Like 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Exactly. So the ads, the original ads were say hello to iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. So it's 10 words if you say them out all out loud. But really what it was doing was setting up that if then because, right? So if you say hello to iPod, then you'll get 1,000 songs in your pocket. Now, just by itself, that's like, okay, fine. But what they were doing was that at some level, somebody recognized that was going to activate that kind of case making in people's heads, because our brains will make meaning of that 1,000 songs and will make meaning of the in the pocket, right? So for instance, just if you think about it, like what would 1,000 songs, what would make that meaningful to you? Like what meaning, if you saw that, you're like, oh, 1,000 songs, especially if all you had was like a Discman, like 1,000 songs means what to you?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you had a Discman and one CD with 10 songs, so you're going to 100x your catalog right away, presumably
Absolutely.
Your favorite songs.
Right. So it's everything from, it's better alignment. I get to match my mood. I get more control. I get more variety. And so again, whatever that is, there's a deeper kind of belief there that's important. You're like, well, the more of my library I can take with me, like the more I can enjoy whatever I'm doing, wherever I'm doing it, whatever it might be. And the same thing is true for in the pocket, right? So like in the pocket also has meaning, and each of us may interpret that a different way, but they kind of knew that in the pocket for their ideal customer, whatever that might be, their customer would say, oh, in the pocket, well, the smaller something is, the more places it can go. And again, like even the smallest things available at that time were still bigger than an iPod, right? I think the smallest thing available at that point was like a mini disc. And then you get this double of them. Each of them on their own would be meaningful, right? But the fact that it's all together suddenly makes it go, well, now if I say hello to iPod, if I get an iPod, then I'll get 1,000 songs in my pocket. And that makes sense to me because the more of my library I can take with me, the better. And the smaller it is, the more places I can go. Sign me up. Right. And so that's what I mean, where if we understand, but in order to figure that out, we had to you have to go all the way back and say, what were they at some level, they had to have figured out what kinds of cases would people make, and what was the most important, what were the most distinctive and meaningful elements of that product that they wanted to accentuate so that all could happen. So long answer to that, but it does all kind of play in together.
It's a great example. And I think I guess funny or not ironic, but it's a story. And you started this whole thing with like stories are how we learn. And so no, that's really cool.
That's right. Right. I mean, we create these stories in our head. Like, and that's the thing with what's so powerful about that ad is that story totally happened inside of our own heads, right? It's a story that we told ourselves. And if we think about it, it was completely irrational. I mean, it was logical, like we made it make sense. But if we really understood 24 years ago what it would require, I mean, because they weren't like, oh, in order to get those 1,000 songs, you're gonna have to take all your CDs, you're gonna have to rip them, you're gonna have to turn them into MP3s, you're gonna have to get this piece of software, you're gonna have to connect the iPod to your computer, somehow through the software, you're gonna have to move those things over, right? If we started there, it would not have happened. Right. So again, what they did was they kind of secured that thing where like, this is the thing that I want. Not that it wasn't that they were like, well, nobody knew they wanted an iPod, but there were like little issues with every other way to listen to music. And so when you give us a story we can tell ourselves about this way, it's not hard for us, for a lot of people, I mean, 6 million people within 4 years to say, I want this better way.
And that's a really good point because I think a lot of people, a lot of businesses, a lot of marketing jumps to the technicals and the how, you got to rip the MP3s and you got to put them, here's how, and as soon as you start talking about that, your people, they're out. Right. And so
exactly.
It's brilliant that that's the way it was done. So I love that you highlighted that as well. If we were to shift this to, let's say, meetings, how could we apply some of these learnings to facilitating meetings that people actually enjoy and that are effective?
Yeah. So, oh my goodness. Yes. Okay. So, I mean, I may sound like a little bit like a broken record, skipping iPod. But a lot of the same things are true. Now, because again, we make sense of the world through story. We operate, we act when we have a story that makes sense. And really all learning happens through the establishment of a story as well. So I am of the opinion that one of the best ways to run a meeting that actually works well is to start with the frame of a story that you want to either have help filling in or that you want to have sharpened, right? Or responded to from there. So let's say, for instance, let's say that we're a leader of an organization and we've got a big change that's coming up. And let's say I've decided as the leader that I think the best way for us to make sure that everybody's ready is that we need to figure out how to like create a kind of we need to scale accountability. Like I've already decided, to me, that seems to make sense. Now I could just go in and say, all right, y'all, here's what we're going to do. We need to scale accountability. So I've hired these people. I've brought them in. They're going to do this training. Now people might agree, but they're not necessarily going to be committed, right? And you might spend a lot of time like defending why I chose these people, whatever, when really some of the issue might have been that people don't understand why scaling accountability was the answer in the first place, right? So what I recommend, and the way that I teach this with my clients and to my audiences, is the ultimate framework to remember is ITBA. If, then, because, and. And so, and we heard it actually with the iPod example, which is the first thing to understand is the if, right? That goes back to that goal of the story I talked about. We need to establish an anchor at the beginning of the meeting, what it is that we are trying to achieve that all of us actively and knowingly want. Right. So again, in the case of this would be like, how can we make sure that each of us is equipped, like that we've got the skills that we need to make sure that we're going to make this big strategic change successfully? Are we all on board there? And then you check it, right? You're like, I think this is that, are we on board? And again, then maybe there's a little debate there, but let's first make sure that we're all proceeding in the same direction, right? Do we agree with this? Do we actually truly agree with this? And then before I would jump to the example, like to the end and say, well, this is why I think this is the answer. I'd say, well, all right, now first I feel like, and you could even say, now to be fully transparent, I believe that we need to scale accountability, but here's why I believe that. This is really key. Number one, right? We want the successful outcome. And I believe that accountability is the ownership of outcomes. Right. So I don't see how, like personally, I don't see how we can get to this outcome if we don't have ownership of those outcomes. So that's why I think accountability needs to be there. But I think that this is about making sure that we've kind of created and scaled this into a culture of accountability. And by the way, this is the message for one of my clients, Vince Molinaro. And the reason I believe that is that success requires execution at scale. So to kind of sum it all up, if we want to make sure we're properly equipped to make this change, then we need to scale accountability, because accountability is the ownership of outcomes and success requires execution at scale. Let's have a chat. So the reason why I think that is a useful structure is that it gives people a frame to understand what the whole idea is in the beginning, right? And this is a situation where I'm trying to get input and buy-in for this piece. And what it allows by putting that kind of rationale for the decision right up on the table is it allows people to express their agreement or their hesitation at the belief level, which is probably where the issue is going to come down the line anyway, right? So again, it's not jump to, we need to hire these people, we need training and whatever. It's I believe the overall strategy is this. Here's why I believe that. And then it's an opportunity to say, all right, is there something else that I'm missing, right? About that we would need differently. Okay. Why that? And if you notice, the if and the then are pretty clear. The if is something we all want, and the then is what we think that strategy is. But the because and the and are really quite different than what we're often taught. Yeah. Again, I go back and remind us of the iPod example. It's not data, as you pointed out, Ryan. Yeah. It's not here's how we do it. It's justification, which are almost always beliefs. Yeah. The more of my library I take with me, the better. Accountability is the ownership of outcomes. By creating something that people can intuitively understand and very quickly do a gut check on whether or not they agree with it, we do something really important when it comes to how people make a decision to change. And that is that we speak to the actual process that happens in their head when they're hearing that information. So, and just, very quickly on that, whenever we receive new information, we have one brain, but we have two processes happening at the same time, right? One of them is the one a lot of times we think about. That's the analytical, rational, deliberate, but slow process. And then the other one is, and this is important, it's not irrational, it's irrational. And it's not just emotional, it's intuitive, it's instinctive, it's pattern-based. So I like to call it the automatic brain. So we've got kind of this analytic process, we've got this automatic process. And that automatic process, again, because it's based on years of pattern experience and observation, it's based on instinct and ooh, I've touched that, that's hot, let me stop. It's way faster than the other one. This is so critical, Ryan, when we were talking to people about something, because anything that I say, that fast brain, that automatic brain is processing it first. Mm-hmm. So if I say anything where you're I don't believe that, or I don't understand that, then it oftentimes will set a very negative place for the other part, the other brain to come in. We've seen this a lot in the last few years, I might say. If somebody says, hey, this is what we need to do, and someone's absolutely not, then it almost doesn't matter how much data, evidence, et cetera, you give them. They just said gut check, no. So when we give people that kind of belief-based argument, that ITBA, what we're doing is we're talking to both brains simultaneously. And that allows us to kind of create at least a moment of saying, this is the idea. Now let's everybody understands it really quickly because it doesn't take a long time to get it out. Now let's build. Does that help?
Yeah.
That was a lot. Sorry.
I love this. I love this. I wish we had more time. I want to give you just two more quick questions and be respectful of your hard stop. So you mentioned the if and the then portions being somewhat, say, obvious. The because is maybe a little bit more challenging to figure out. So for somebody listening who wants to start to utilize this, do you have a framework, if you will, for figuring out the true or the most effective because phrasing?
Yes. All right. So at the highest level, what we're looking for are concepts, which are really beliefs that are as inarguable as possible. So places to look for those are, honestly, things like Proverbs, where you say slow and steady wins the race, or seeing is believing, because generally people were like, yes, that's true. Even more solid are things that are, I know it's going to sound very geeky, but they're fundamentally principles of science and math, right? What goes up must come down. Gravity, right? To get to zero, every negative needs a positive, right? It's a great example of like weight loss, right? You're like, hey, it's calories in, calories out. It's just math. And so part of it is really trying to get to that level. Figuring out what to say, that's a little slightly more involved, but that's kind of the first place to get to, and then kind of make sure it all works as an argument.
Are those a bit of a Trojan horse to sort of get past that like initial automatic brain that might be okay?
Yeah. And what's important is we're not doing it to trick anybody. And so one of the things is when I'm working with folks on marketing and branding, one of the things that really gets their head, like they just almost can't process it because we've been taught such backwards things, where I'm like, other than the question, this is all about your own beliefs. This is not what do I need to say to somebody so that they will say yes. This is, why do you believe that this element of your strategy, why do you believe that accountability must be part of this answer? Right. Apple, why do you believe that variety is key to a better way to listen to your music? Why do you believe that? And then that's kind of process wise, that's how to get there. You say, okay, if you've got the answer already, you need to kind of keep going on why you believe it until you get something that really other people can't argue with. Yeah. And the trick here is that you're going to think other people can't argue with it. And honestly, these days, it's a great use actually of generative AI, because you can say, here's my argument, pick it apart. And it will, right? And so you can start to say, okay, well, how do I make this stronger? How can I make this because more inarguable to people, right? How can I make this because I really believe it? And again, what you're going to find is that what ends up getting there is that you're like, I may never have thought about putting it that way, but that makes sense. Like, for instance, I was just working with a client and she was talking about like the question she wants to answer is, how do I align with the people that she's working with? They're really asking this question: how do I align how I act with who I want to be? By the way, that could work for any fitness and health goal too, right? And in her mind, and we built to this, she didn't quite know, well, she knew how she described the answer, but we needed to make sure it was intuitively understandable to other people. So the first thing that we said, like that she established, was like, we've got to have connection there. And I'm like, okay, why? And she said, well, and then we kept going on and she would explain. And I'm like, well, if we think about it, I don't know how you align anything without either a physical or a conceptual connection or both, right? Like literally, like I cannot think about how to do that. Right. And I invite anybody else to. So we ended up just saying alignment requires connection. So if you want to align how you act with, who you want to be, we've got to focus on connection because alignment requires connection. Now, she needs to explain what that means and what she's talking about. Great. But a connection alone won't do it. So we were like, okay, what is the other piece? And we were kind of really talking about it. And then she originally started with something like heart. And I'm like, okay, but why? And then she was explaining it. And I was like, it sounds like you're actually talking about multiple dimensions. Right. And so eventually we ended up with dimensions as the second one, but we got there because of actually we went to the concept first. And that concept was identity spans dimensions, was how we ended up putting it.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and again, like you can say, right, if I want to align what I do to who I want to be, it's again hard to argue with the fact that my identity has a number of different dimensions. There's like how I show up physically. There's like, there's the emotional, there's potentially a spiritual connection. And so ultimately with that, we ended up saying her ITBA was, if you want to align how you act with who you want to be, then connect your dimensions or connect across dimensions. Why? Because alignment requires connection and identity spans dimensions. Now, again, it's just the introduction, right? She's got to then kind of give more evidence, that's where the data and the how comes in. After someone goes, oh, I can see why that would work. Mm-hmm. Now tell me enough information so I can get to that point where I can see that it will work for me and that level of effort is worth it.
I'd love to ask you another question, but it's time for you to go.
All right. You can give me like 2 minutes because where I'm going is like 2 minutes away. And this is too much fun. I don't want to give it. All right. One more question.
So the first one's easy. Where can our listeners get more of you?
Easiest place to find me is probably LinkedIn. That's the place where I spend most time. But I'm also literally the only Tamsen Webster spelled this way in the universe. So, or at least the searchable universe. So like, I'm not hard to find.
Okay. And then final one is, what would be your number one tip for listeners to develop more consistency?
More consistency.
Or to align their actions with who they want to be. Hey, as you're talking through that, I was going to tell you, that's actually how I sign all of my books.
My gosh.
My default signature is, may your actions always align with your goals and your values. So.
Well, then I didn't even know that. And look, it's like the universe is speaking. All right. I would say find the story you repeat. Mm-hmm. That's how to operate with consistency, because you already are operating with consistency. This is one of my biggest things is like you already are living out a story day in, day out, every day. Like you are already saying, like, Ryan, clearly you are all about how to align your actions and your identity all the time. And so, and you have developed your own approach for doing that, right? I've got another client in the fitness industry, and, he articulated as like, his question is, he really wants to help people put themselves in a position to win, right? And then we started to look across his life, and again and again and again, that was either what he did or what he was trying to figure out. And so I would say that's the first place to start. And then you can start to fill in the rest of it. But if you start to figure out what is a way to frame as a question, kind of the through line of your life. Like for me, it's how do we accelerate the adoption of new ideas, right? And if you can kind of look at it and start to think about it that way, then it allows you to understand what you have already been consistent about so that you can continue to be consistent in a more productive way.
This is awesome. Tamsen, thank you so much for hanging out with us.
My pleasure.
This
Absolutely.
Has been a blast. So hopefully we get to do this again. And
I hope so.
That's it for our show this week. Everybody, thanks for being here. I'm going to keep the closing brief so Tamsen can get out. But thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get notified of new episodes. And if you enjoyed this one, please share it with someone who would benefit from the conversation that we've had today. We'll catch you on the next episode.